Hello, LS. Thank you for the Christmas present. This was on your Christmas list, so I really appreciate you reaching
Yeah,
out
there
and
you go.
actually saying you do this. So I was shocked. I'm not gonna lie. I saw the DM. I was like, no way. Um,
I tried to a lot of people that asked for like non-tangible things like this, I
mhm.
tried to reply to like a lot just because it's, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I know you're probably
Yeah.
super busy, but so yeah. What have you been up to lately? I know the with Worlds ending, a lot of content creators, stuff like that around the league scene have kind of taken a break almost, going off season themselves. Like, what have you been up to?
Yeah. Well, after Worlds ended, I just sort of felt like the pressure break from this year because this was the hardest year ever by Riot because of the time zones.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were doing all three regions, with Riot like changing up the hours that each region went live at and the days, it made it the most difficult in addition to the fact that there's way more games this year. There was just more games in every single region.
Yeah.
So after finals ended, I just thought like, okay, I'm just gonna take a break. I did my like final career recap stream where I went over like the last 10 years in league. And I talked about a lot of things. There was some stuff that didn't get talked about, um, but then that was pretty much it. And I've just sort of been on a break since. I mostly just, I mean, I play WoW every day. I'm on WoW with like viewers, other WoW pro or other league pros. Yeah,
No,
stuff like that.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I know the remake has been super popular. A lot of people have used it as like a nice break. I've been losing my mind in solo queue while everyone is waiting for next season to start. But what are your preliminary thoughts on next season?
I haven't looked at it yet, because I kept saying that I wouldn't look at everything going on until it's completely finalized. Typically I do this with a lot of changes because Riot just tends to change things.
Yeah,
Um, so I haven't seen it.
yeah,
Um,
I definitely think.
beyond
Yeah.
like, yeah,
I was gonna say, I think a lot of the major like item changes stuff like are gonna get so gutted and nerfed when it actually
yeah,
releases. So it's almost not worth doing a deep analysis right now. Like, um,
right,
but
exactly, exactly.
yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pro scene itself. You kind of already mentioned that there was way more games this year. The scheduling has changed. First off, LEC did the triple split, and there was a lot
Yes.
of discussion about that, especially in the coaching circles, about how right after Worlds ended, a lot of LEC coaches came out and said, "Hey, this is not good. This is not good for us. It's not good for players." What are your thoughts on that compared to kind of the traditional two part split?
So if you go back on Twitter, in January, February, March, when it was first happening, even April, you'd see that everyone was very for it, right? There was a lot of positivity around it. Everyone said like, "Oh, this is really good," and it wasn't until towards the end of summer, the championship points, the LEC like championship series thing, where like summer doesn't matter. It wasn't until around then and then post Worlds where people started saying that it's really bad. My view on it is that objectively, it is the most exciting for viewers.
Yeah.
Um, and viewership of the game and the longevity of the game, and ultimately the longevity of esports and the career of aforementioned pro players, coaches, teams, etc., is dependent on what is best for viewers. It doesn't matter about pros and coaches. And I've always held that stance, that it's community and viewers first above all else. So, because without them, I mean, it just dies. You don't have the inflated salaries that most don't deserve and everything else without this viewership. So,
Sure.
whatever is best for viewership should just happen. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. My original critique about it was the fact that it sort of devalues a championship, right? It feels like winning a championship in a three split, where you
Sure.
basically played well for 6 weeks, doesn't seem the same as winning the traditional like 12-week long haul. Like, um, it just felt like it was sort of they kind of couched it in like a performance based thing. Oh, you get more best ofs, you get more
Right.
playoff experience, you get more stage time, all that. But at the same time, like the coaches from their side was like, oh, well, the performance side doesn't make any sense because now we don't have a chance to develop as a team. We just have to go straight into full speed, start winning week two. When
Yep.
normally, like especially in LCS, for example, where we're still on the longer splits, they look at the first 4 weeks as kind of a developmental period anyway. And obviously, you want to win, but you're not trying to have a playoff ready team in week 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that's why you kind of saw it in LEC too, where like the kind of lower tier teams were winning the first parts of the splits, right? Like the first split was second kind of surprise, like BDS was like the best team in LEC somehow. And then
Right.
by the end of it, you saw the traditional breakdown again. Okay, G2's at the top, Fnatic's back in there, like
Yep.
and I think that's kind of what we expected to see. But then that changes when you have playoffs thrown in now. So now teams are winning championships, but they're clearly not the best team in the league by the end of it, right? Like
Well, I
you
think
think it's
that was the most interesting stuff, right? With
mhm,
these like rapid splits, is
mhm.
that it seemed like who was best always just kept changing,
Yeah,
in a way. And I think that the problem with that is mostly narrative, whether it's driven by broadcast, co-streamers, live viewers, Twitter, Reddit, right? A lot of that falls into that conundrum. And it also goes to show just how quickly like mini tournaments almost in a way can just have different winners. And I think a lot of people
yeah.
don't understand this if they're only used to League of Legends,
Hmm.
which I find that difficult to believe because I would imagine that esports fans watch other esports. So they understand like the variance of, best of 3 format or something in like StarCraft 1, Warcraft 3, MLG open brackets back in the
Hmm.
day.
Hmm.
Um, even fighting game tournaments and stuff, right? Like the top player will come winning off a major, and then he gets eliminated in eighth at the next tournament or something. It doesn't mean he's not the top player, or that he didn't just win the biggest major and then he got eliminated in eighth at the next tournament. Um, a lot of esports fans seem to think that like skill is linear,
Yeah,
or something like that, and it's not. And a lot of times, your skill is demonstrated throughout the span of lots of games.
yeah,
And people bink tournaments all the time, or they bink series that then allow them to go on and bink a tournament. And that's not what skill is. But I would argue that the average game knowledge of a viewer, spectator, etc., isn't at a high enough level to take in the, I guess, holistic gameplay of a team and then levy it against multi,
yeah. Well,
multi-week span, etc.
we're very results based analysis here, or
Yes, yes,
analysts.
yes,
Yeah. Oh, if you win, you're great. If you lost, you're just trash. Like that's
yes,
how it is.
yes.
Like it's certainly not the best team in the entire world last year. Didn't win a world's finals, so therefore they're overrated and
Correct,
probably
correct.
overhyped.
Exactly, exactly.
Especially with Riot though, right? Like League especially, it's interesting that the meta will drastically shift before major events, before major tournaments. You'll see the Worlds patch was such a different meta than what teams are playing on in playoffs, literally right
Right.
before to qualify for it. So I think it's always going to be really challenging to really assess teams. Like maybe I would think adaptability would be a metric that probably needs to be more explored rather than
Yeah.
like oh, this is the
Well, I
best mid
think
laner, this is best, whatever.
I think stuff like that is a lot more exciting, and I would compare it to TCGs, right? TCGs that have a arena format, where you draft from like a pool of cards, and so that way, if there's a pro tournament,
Mm,
so let's take like the Magic the Gathering World Tour, right?
mhm.
You have the constructed decks, which everyone knows the deck lists. Everyone's very familiar with the matchups. They've all played it, literally hundreds of times against each other. And then you have the draft format, where the decks will quite literally never look the same, and then also no one knows what each other has. Um, and they're different skill sets. Draft
Right.
and constructed are different. And I think that when the meta is shaken up right before Worlds, that it makes for a more interesting viewing experience. But the problem is that the pro teams and coaches and whatnot, they don't like that, for obvious reasons,
Yeah.
right? Job security and these other types of things. But again, it goes back to viewers first. Um, and I
Well,
think that objectively it makes things more exciting when things seem so unknown.
now that this kind of leads to my next thing is how do you feel about the new fearless draft formats coming out?
So I think it's good. I mean, it's being like tested in the waters, but inevitably this is the direction that league has to go towards because
Yeah.
of pro teams.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, But yeah, back in 2021, I think there was a video with me and Nemesis where we talked about this. We said that this should just be implemented because it is a form of skill expression, and again, it makes it so that it's not such a drag to keep watching pro games.
Yeah, yeah.
However, it will be a drag because what I already know is going to happen. Maybe I'll, if you have like VODs enabled or something, can like clip this from like
Oh, yeah.
6 months from now. What'll happen is teams will rotate the same cycles that other teams do. So even in Fearless Draft, it will gravitate back towards this is game one's bans, and then this is game two's bans. And then instead of rotating the same two champions, you're rotating the same two comps.
That's
sense. What's going to inevitably happen. And that's just, that's the adaption that would normally happen, right? Like watching like speedrunners in a video game get like nerfed by the game company, and then they have to find a new way to speedrun. But they're still ultimately doing the same path.
Yeah, I think it has to be combined with the best of, right? Like it only makes sense if you're doing longer series, which I've been pushing for LCS to return to a best of for forever, and like what's cool is that they're testing a lot of these things in amateur. So I actually find, I mean, no offense to any of the teams, but I find watching amateur sometimes way more exciting, like because you get one play styles that are, they may not be as polished, but you're seeing ridiculous drafts come out. You're seeing really cool matchups. You're seeing actual novel ideas being tested because it's a best of 2 right now. I would love to see best of 3, but they're willing to throw a game in the beginning to try something because the angle looks good, or they're willing to pull out a comp because X, amateur player is a one trick that nobody really knows how to play against Kled, and they're like, oh, let's pull it out. Like, I love that kind of stuff. But it does feel like LCS specifically is, I mean, and you would know this better than almost anyone, is a little bit resistant to pulling out comps or drafts that are like, hey, I know this is wildly off meta, but makes sense. Like, what was your experience like when you were coaching with C9 and pulling out like the Soraka mid, pulling things out like that? Like, what was that met with? Because
like met with in what sense?
Well, clearly when they brought, I assume they brought you in knowing, okay, this guy's going to pull out something different, right? And players must have known that. So like when you're like, okay, let's do this, let's try this. Is it an immediate like, that sounds weird? Or was it, okay, well, we knew LS was going to do this. Let's try it.
So there was the Korea 9 scrims and there was the LCS, like Academy LCS Fusion, right? And in the Korean 9 scrims, when I was playing mid lane, I was playing those champions that Fudge eventually went on to play. So everyone already knew that those champions had an extremely high likelihood to get played. However, Fudge did like first time Soraka on stage.
Yeah.
And we decided on Soraka like a few hours before the game. And so we did 1v1s at LCS to do the Soraka. I was like met with resistance on some things, but it was never like a no. And then obviously there's some stuff that never came out on stage. Like, Summit did play a champion that I would have not preferred, and there was even a hover like for Gangplank instead of Atrox like in the Team Liquid game, and he just said that he wasn't confident. And so and I understand this. I understand that it's not a thing that happens overnight and it takes time and stuff and you progress towards it. But I know there's like a lot of theories or something that like I had difficulty getting players to play things, but it never really was the case. I think one of the only like actual things that we did have, but we never played it, even though it was one of our highest win rate champions, was Cho'Gath. And Berserker just said that he wouldn't be able to land Q against good players. So there was something like when Gumayushi used it or something, there was like an internal meme where, how did Gumayushi land Qs? And it was like, because he used it in LCK, which Berserker would find to be superior players. So stuff like this. Now, there was the thing where, I don't know, like we talked about this after me and Max, because Max obviously ended up leaving, and why Summit wouldn't play or do other things after I left. And I thought it was the Korean cultural age thing, because Summit, I think, is older than Max.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if that's the case, or I don't know if it's because me and Max have very different personas with how we, I guess, just not conduct ourselves, but
I've noticed,
I don't know.
yeah, I noticed a cultural tendency with Korean players in particular of only kind of listening to Korean coaches.
Yeah,
That's sort of been across multiple orgs, multiple teams, not just one player in particular.
yeah, of course, of
And
course. A lot of it
yeah,
does have to do with age,
yeah, yeah.
for sure.
Or even relative accomplishment level, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're a Korean coach who was also a high level pro who also played against
Right,
them,
right,
and
right, right,
yeah,
right.
then you're like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, fine, we respect that. But
Hmm.
it's interesting because it seems like the style of team that you wanted to implement or you wanted to train is almost at odds with that Korean culture, right? Of let's have a very fluid uh dynamic drafting process, not meta. Like there's very little, I guess, structure to the actual, like, these are the, like, when I see most LCS teams now, right, when I go into their draft meetings and stuff, I see them do their
Yeah.
whole draft board. It's very much set, like what 2 or 3 champions each player wants to play on stage that
Yes.
week.
Yeah, it's
There's
very
really
true.
little deviation from that,
Yes, yes, yes.
and they'll
Very, very
draft
true.
to that. They'll try to draft in order to force those picks into the board.
Right, 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 right.
But
Yeah.
it seems like, maybe if you were to take that philosophy and implement it with, like I said, an amateur team where they're already open ended, they're already like, hey, let's try whatever. Might even, but also it seems like that kind of system would require a lot of time. That is not that's not a program that you can develop in 6 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree,
Like
and I
you're
don't think anyone would expect it to. Yeah.
right.
But I still did feel very good with how much was done in such a short period.
Absolutely. I
Because
mean,
again, there were other champions that after I left, things that we did have like practice and we had really good success rate even in
mhm.
Korea when I was playing mid lane. It just never came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I think that was the biggest thing about that whole season, or that whole split, I should say, was a lot of
yeah,
people said the same thing. It was like it was the most exciting time to watch LCS for a while.
yeah,
Not gonna lie, like I was genuinely hyped every week to just see what was gonna happen on stage, and it sort of like raised this expectation of LCS. That being said, I mean, it was probably, it was spring split. It was very early on. Who knows how things would have gone long term, but early success always kind of brings the excitement level up and then sort of sets a precedent of like, maybe this is something we can build on. It was sort of disappointing to see like no one else kind of continue doing that, right? Like innovating new draft
right,
picks, stuff like that. It started becoming, every time I hear pro players in meetings talk about their draft, it's always like, well, we know this is good, and
right,
we watched LCK. They're playing this. This must be good, and they kind of just slot it in. This is the answer to
right.
this. What do you think it would take for LCS to either? Because okay, my thing is I've never thought LCS was going to catch up to LCK or LPL by copying what LPL and LCK are doing. That just logically doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
I mean, so what is the answer in your opinion? What is the way that we actually progress the
Well,
skill level?
you don't chase where people are going, and you don't chase the top of the mountain. You aim above it,
Right.
or you aim to the next summit that is not that summit. And doing so, you develop or you find out or figure out methods that allow you to do things that even they're not doing.
Mhm.
And naturally, we actually see this on players that are like on the come up or something like that, because they'll be the first ones to adapt things that aren't being done by the current gen. And we see this in every single game. Now I'm on my 20th year in esports across like so many different games, so I can make tons of references to various different esports where they were very fleshed out, right? And we saw the same exact trajectory, same exact patterns, same exact developments. And it feels painful to be able to not only point to it, but demonstrate that it's already happened time and time and time again. And no one listens to it in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so, like, and I'm getting a little sidetracked right now. This is the same reason that Max Waldo quit. And I mean, I hope that he'll talk about it one day or something. It was the flight after Chicago, where he said he just realized that people don't get it.
Yeah.
And it was just an emptiness. where there were celebrations or something backstage after winning Chicago, and they were started talking about worlds and all this other type of stuff, and he just felt a emptiness, or like a void, as if to feel as though they don't realize how far behind they are and what is actually needed to make improvements and catch up.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what led to him quitting.
I think
And I'm sort of at the
that's
same exact point now.
yeah.
I like, um, yeah, it's a crossroad. So to answer your question, what needs to happen, right? It there, I don't know. There's no simple solution because there's not people one that want to do it, but it's also, I mean, I'm sure that you experience this in personal training and stuff. There is no instant 8-pack abs.
Yeah.
You
That's a
know,
good
or
comparison,
there
yeah.
is no instant, 10% body fat or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
And because of that, people don't want to do that, right? They want something that will supplement them to allow them to perform above their caliber in some way, right? Some manner, some facet. And that's what they would rather have. They want steroids, which is
Right.
also why they always call for roster changes. It's why they always call for, oh, we have to get this person. We need this person.
Yep.
Let's get this really big roster, etc. The LoL esports ecosystem is more akin to people chasing steroids than actually attempting to understand everything that's going on.
Specifically Western League though, right?
No. Western League is infinitely more equipped than Eastern League.
But I'm saying that's chasing this immediate improvement rather than like, hey, we have systems that are developed that we're gonna be able to long term improve in.
No, so I would say that Western League holistically is way ahead of Eastern League in terms of well, not necessarily financial support anymore. They were.
Yeah.
But like the actual coaching staffs that Western League teams have
Hmm.
are infinitely more equipped at breaking down problems, explaining it, identifying problems, the data, etc. It all dwarfs Eastern League. Eastern League doesn't have anything like that. Eastern League is literally like walking into those like huts and that have no technology, but they make amazing food. Or like something like that. You know what I mean?
So it really
and
is
then
just a player.
Western,
It's just a player based diff. Like their players
it's
are
a
overall
player
just
and
so much
cultural
better.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's a player and cultural difference.
So as a whole, would you say then that most Eastern teams are almost player driven in terms of how they practice, how they perform, how they get better, versus Western where it seems like the players do their thing, but the coaches are the ones trying to dictate where the team goes?
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part.
That's interesting.
And
Yeah.
the reason that the West has been able to catch up in the last couple of years is because League of Legends, in a way, has sort of hit a limit
Yeah.
of what more you can get good at.
Right. Right.
And it's because of this limit that allows the facade, or I don't know what you would want to call it, that the West is like really close. I do wholeheartedly believe the West is close enough to Bink series.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that is real.
I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you that because obviously I'm not high elo enough to truly analyze the game, but I think in my view, my just general opinion of watching a lot of League over the last few years, the specifically the LCS has looked a lot more competitive against the East in the last couple of years
Yes.
than in years past. Even in 2018 when, C9 made semis, I don't think they actually looked as good as the West did now. I think we threw a few games,
Yeah.
which really, really sucked. But like that is what it is. You get into your own heads about things sometimes. I was saying
Right.
against the LNG game, C9 100% wins that game if they just played it like anyone but LNG. If they were against FlyQuest in that scenario, they don't run down mid, right? Like they just back. They got Baron, they just back.
Yeah, there's a lot
Well,
of
I
things.
mean,
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, I definitely feel like they're closer. It's just everyone online, everyone on Reddit, everyone on Twitter is like, oh, we lose again. We're like the US or the LCS is garbage, right? They can't win a game.
Yeah.
And it's like, but did you watch the games? Like it's so close so many times. But I understand what you mean too. Like it almost feels like, well, at some point there's only so much efficiency you can crank out of an entire game of League of Legends, right? If
Yes.
all these LPL and LCK teams have gotten to the 99th percentile of efficiency and how cleanly they can play the game, and we're at 95%, we're still going to lose almost every game, but
Yeah.
it's going to be real close. And
Yeah.
that's what you said is like kind of starting to feel like that now, where we might have been 20% behind. Now we're like 15% behind or 10% behind.
Yeah, and the thing is that you know, if you take the best, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a really apt analogy. There is a limitation to how much a superior player can display that they're superior over you if
Right.
the sample size is 10 games.
Right. Right.
When you're already both so close, right?
Makes sense.
It would be like you know, how many games do you have to watch of Magnus Carlsen to show that he's really that much better than Hikaru,
Yeah.
right? When they're so close.
Right.
And I think people don't realize that.
Yeah.
You need, so when Worlds comes around and a team only plays 10 games, people can't grasp it. And I think that Riot has done a phenomenal job with this that Blizzard failed at, because Blizzard had so many tournaments internationally, and it made people realize real fucking quick that Korea just fucking owns you. Korea enslaves you is pretty much what Blizzard did. And Blizzard, they tried to dial it back and they tried to region lock it, but it was already too late. No one cared anymore.
Yeah.
And so all these people on Twitter, and I see it all the time, they're like, oh, give us more international events, more international events. They don't realize that that's the trajectory that Blizzard went down. And if people released their scrims against challengers teams, so like for instance, I know with 100% certainty that T1's third team had a massively winning record over some Worlds teams. A massive fucking winning record. These are 14-year-old kids
I'm not surprised.
that are just shitting on your Worlds representatives.
Yeah.
So now imagine an open bracket tournament where you can just have 200 Korean teams. The Western teams are not making it to the round of 16.
Yeah.
They cannot fade enough bullets. Like it's just not going to happen.
That's really tough because if you took, most of our and pretty much 99% of our amateur teams here, they're not beating the 8th place LCS team 10 out of 15 games. There's no way. Like
Yes.
that's actually kind of disappointing, but I'm not surprised. It goes back to your original point about player-based diff, right? Like if you took like the top 10% challengers in China, they're probably beating an LCS team. You throw them on a 5-man team, they'll beat them in some scrims. Like they'll probably throw down. It'd be interesting to see just like the level of talent that's not even being utilized in those regions. Just players streaming or players just, playing at the highest level, but making TikToks and stuff, like boosting, right? It's probably more lucrative to boost. Well, I guess with the organizational side of LCS then, right? You're saying that we have the coaching staffs, and do you feel competency is a thing, or is it just the fact that the organization is there?
Competency in what way?
Like, do you think they're doing a good enough job of getting teams to improve over the course of a year?
Most teams are all player led. They're all player led.
And is that something you think is ideal, or is that something that just it is the way it is?
No, it's a byproduct of the scene.
Yeah,
I think that's just how it is. There's things I should say that I won't. Like from a really funny story. I mean, okay, I'll say it without mentioning names. There was a whole new roster that was brought together for LCS, right? Totally like new roster put together, etc. And they're boot camping for their very first week, or like second week or something. And at the dinner with all like the players and stuff, everyone is already complaining about like the staff, the coaches and stuff, right? But those coaches go on to stay for the entirety of the year. But like it happens that quickly in like a week or 2 weeks. And there's a lot of players that have good relationships, I think, with some coaches. And I think a lot of it has to do with politics, because job security and stuff. And we see a lot of like very questionable roster changes that happen in some regions. And there's absolutely nepotism that goes on there.
Yeah.
And that's a weird like House of Cards situation. All of this stuff. And it's troublesome in a way too that no one talks about it more.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
unfortunate. Everyone kind of sort of knows that, right? They know there's a lot of nepotism. They know that there's certain people like that have been around forever.
right.
I've always had sort of a critique of LCS orgs I've worked with in that environmentally the orgs don't support an environment that's comparable to other pro sports. Meaning coaches should be sort of held to some degree of esteem until they prove otherwise, right? Like the fact that players will come in and be like, I don't trust this coach because they were like Diamond One peak or whatever. And it's like, well,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe, but have you actually listened to what they're saying? Have you looked at what they're saying? It doesn't make sense to you rather than immediately thinking like, not this rank. They don't know anything about the game. I can't listen to them.
right.
So I've always had issues with that, and it's sort of makes it challenging because then how do you improve, right? As a player, you have to objectively think, how do you actually improve? Unless there's so much ego that you know they're thinking, oh, I'm already as good as I can be, or I'm gonna be able to compete against freaking Faker, like,
Right.
uh, which clearly nobody here has. I mean, I guess not as a team, I should say,
Yeah.
but I mean, you Gryffin, I saw Gryffin in the chat. What's going on with him? Like going to T1 now, are we gonna see a little bit more NA to LCK interaction both ways?
Griffin's my fucking adopted son or something. I don't know. Or
I'm not
it's
gonna lie.
something.
Your tweets
Yeah.
of his quotes are just they have me dying.
Griffin messages me every day. Yeah, I can't focus.
It's the most
No,
esports
it's
thing I've
funny.
ever read.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I love it. I
but
love it.
yeah, I'm so excited to actually see that happen because it just highlights something I've always thought is true is like there's a ton of players here that just don't get the shot, right? They either don't get
Yeah.
scouted, they don't know the right people, they I don't know, they didn't get the shot that in the time frame they had and they have to make a decision. They're like, "Hey, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go do something else."
Right.
And it's unfortunate because there's been a ton of probably very mechanically talented players who have a ton of ability and just basically never got their shot, and so they just fade out. And then that's
Yeah.
kind of the people in LCK, LPL who just they do get the shot. Maybe the scouting is better there. What are your thoughts on scouting in LCS and like how do we improve that? At least player identification.
Scouting. So scouting in LCK seems to be, from my experiencing it, both knowing coaches that were scouters
Mm-hmm.
and seeing it firsthand. Basically, they go down the entire ladder and they friend at everyone. And then they ask, "What's your age?" And then if that certain team has an age requirement, then they unfriend them after like saying like, "Oh, sorry," you know. And then if the person's eligible to test, they invite them to the tryouts.
Hmm.
And the tryouts are obviously all hosted locally. Some of them are hosted online. And that's what scouting is. There's not scouting like what people think is scouting. There's not some Korean wizard that knows like what they're watching and all this other stuff. A lot of it is just complete random chance.
Wow.
Now for top teams, the same can also be said in the yesteryears, and you can demonstrate that this is what was happening. Top teams will always attract the top talent.
Sure.
In most cases. And the really funny stories, and you know, I hope like Joe Mar.
You're about to get yourself in trouble.
Hold on, oh, yeah, hold on. Let me think about this. Let me think about this. Okay, be. Hold on, let me think. Let me think if he'd be upset. Hold on. You know what? I'm just gonna not say anything. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
been a
That's fair.
calm,
That's fair.
it's been a calm New Year's,
we're,
right?
start,
Me
we're
and
starting
Frodo.
first day of the year with a banger.
Yeah. Never mind. The TLDR is that some of the best players in Korea were actually disregarded, like the current best players in Korea. Some of them, not Faker, obviously, but like some of the newer players, right, in the last like 5 years, 6 years. They were basically touted as just garbage by these scouts, coaches, whatever you want to call them. Now they're the best players, and not even in Korea, in the world, or like some of them were, right, before they went on to like retire and stuff. So yeah, that is Eastern scouting.
That's
There's
kind of that kind of begs the question that like what are they looking at? You know, what determines a
they're not looking
valuable
at anything. They're looking at internal scrim results. That's it.
the eyeball test and like
That is literally it. Yes.
oh my god. All right. So they're actually not that much better than LCS. They just basically have better players.
The players vote the other players in typically.
That's wild. I know.
So like I
Yeah.
mean Griffin's in the chat or something,
Yeah.
right? So this is pretty funny. I think it was like Gryffin tested, and then at the end of Griffin's tests, T1 removed the other jungler. I think that's all that happened. Yeah, like it actually happens like that. That is what happens.
Like you gapped them, you're gone. Like
Quite literally, yeah.
all right.
Sometimes there's other things that go into it, like that player already kind of wants to leave
No, I see.
because they're young and they're not used to the pressure and the environment and stuff.
I see.
But yeah, stuff like that.
I almost feel like maybe on the Western side, like on LCS side, we're just we're overthinking it maybe. Like we're going to the point of like, oh, the eyeball test isn't good enough, and like we can't tell who's good and who's not. Do team dynamics matter? Do personalities matter? But
well, so if you listen to a lot of the stuff that I'm saying that Eastern teams do, it's actually the same stuff that we're criticizing that the Western teams should never do.
Right.
And that's what I'm like trying to yell at the clouds about, is that a lot of like it seems like people are trying to look towards China and Korea for like answers or solutions, and the irony is that it's not good.
If we do everything they're doing, will be
should not
worse.
be. Yeah.
That makes sense actually. I think it's super interesting actually that you bring it up that way, because we almost have this, like, obviously we're not, I don't know enough about the logistics of how LCK teams recruit. I knew that they went and they messaged challenger players, but I thought it was more of a system of like, hey, this player's popping off in challenger, let's reach out and see what they do. But it's literally just friend request everyone, see who qualifies, put them into a ring together. Whoever survives gets a shot. Like,
right.
that's interesting. That's super interesting. But that also makes sense then why you would perhaps rate a player as low, and then when you actually give them a shot and then they make it to the main team on T1, all of a sudden they're winning worlds. Right? Like we've seen it in the LCS too. So many players who just absolutely were considered garbage and washed up or past their prime. We'll talk about that too. Past their prime, what does it even mean anymore? Like contracts. Right. Comes back to win his LCS championship in like the 8th year he's played. Like he was on academy for 3 years, like all this, didn't have a team. Comes back and actually wins LCS, and then actually competes pretty well at Worlds. I personally don't think skill level in League is age gated, especially not before 30. But what are your thoughts on that?
Age rated?
Age gated, yeah. Like I think that there's a huge idea. I've seen it both in the coaching level and the player level. I've seen there's some sort of like cap on people's ceiling, and once you see their ceiling, they're not going to get much better than that.
Well, I mean, all right. So my thoughts on mechanics like this and other stuff is more that it's more about how weathered someone is more than anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I think is going on is like a 15-year-old who's played the game for 6 years is identical to a 21-year-old who played the game for 6 years. So even though they're 27 and they're 21, they both have the same amount of weathering going on. And what I mean by mostly weathering is they have habits that they've developed, they've had things that they've seen a million times over, etc. And they have, ideas about the game, or like what you should and shouldn't do and yada, yada, yada. So they're equally weathered. As for like physical mechanics, no, I don't think that it's the most important thing in the world, but I do think that someone that gradually does get older, there is a subconscious allocation that would go on towards things that don't just pertain to let me be the very, very best in this video game. Yeah. And whether someone wants to control it or not, it is on your mind subconsciously. And I think that plays a really big factor.
Sure.
People always reference, they'll reference fighting games, they'll reference CSGO, they'll reference Street Fighter, these things, and they'll say, well, there's players that are in their 30s and 40s, and they're still professional players. And then you look at the amount of new player pool that comes in, that is actually youth, and it's non-existent,
right?
To an extent. Now, what we do know from StarCraft 1 and Warcraft 3 is quite literally the teenagers won everything. There was never an incident where a player in their mid-20s contended and got close to beating the teenagers. I think that's a really, really fascinating data point.
Do you have an opinion on why?
Because Well, is it actually mechanics? I mean, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Um, is
To
it
be fair,
actually the
to be
mechanics any
fair, I think
longer?
I mean our RTS mechanics are infinitely harder. Like,
Then yeah,
they,
StarCraft mechanics are much
yeah,
much much harder.
yeah.
They're arguably the hardest in the world.
Watching Pro
Um,
StarCraft made me never ever want to touch the game again. Like,
yes, yes, yes. So quite literally, yeah, teenagers could not be beaten
yeah,
in StarCraft 1.
yeah.
And you were considered ancient if you were 21 in StarCraft.
Hmm.
21, 22, 23, like that range of
Hmm.
age. So I don't know if there's like legitimacy. I don't think that there's enough of a data point and stuff. Now I do think that with the way that stuff flows and all this other type of stuff, yeah, I don't think it's ever actually something that prevents you. At least not in
That makes sense.
um, modern gameplay.
Well,
And maybe
yeah.
League is just not intensive enough for it to ever actually come to fruition
Well,
compared to like something like StarCraft.
as compared to well, your examples too, the players that are older competing in like fighting games, competing in CS:GO, the variables don't change that much in those games, right?
Mm.
Like you play Street
They're
Fighter,
static, yes.
yeah, you don't even relearn the meta every 3 weeks. You know, it's like
Mm.
everything is sort of
Yes, yes,
consistent.
yes.
You know, season to season. So
Yes.
yeah, a lot less
Well,
time.
um, yeah, so there's an interesting conversation that I've had on this to an extent. Um, yes, they are. I would argue in many ways that League is patchless.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's one of my really strong claims. And I think there's again, I think there's a very easy way to demonstrate that it is effectively patchless. Even using patchless games such as StarCraft 1 and Warcraft 3.
Uh-huh.
And the argument and this conversation originally happened on Trash Talk with Doublelift and Cadril.
Hmm.
And I didn't think through the argument and conversation enough to where the obvious rebuttal that League has a patch every 2 weeks, obviously means that it's not a patchless game. Whereas my main claim is that Riot changes so little throughout the
Right.
course of a year, it is effectively a patchless game because of the sheer volume of games that a pro player would need to play for the patch alteration to actually have played a part in their individual game.
Mm.
And the way that I liken this to StarCraft 1 and Warcraft 3 is StarCraft 1 and Warcraft 3 altered their maps every 2 months. They were brand new maps, not even like rotating maps, completely brand new.
Right.
This altered the timing attacks. It altered the unit compositions. It altered the spawn locations. It altered the travel distance. It altered what could you possibly defend with.
Right.
Sometimes you didn't need as many units because of certain things. The pro players constantly were in a cycle every 2 months, do or die as well for StarCraft because
Hmm.
one, the salaries were not nearly as big, and then in addition to that, the player life was not as big. You were basically out of the game by the time you're 2021.
Hmm.
So effectively, League, StarCraft, and Warcraft are identical in that they are patchless games. The maps that were released by the tournament organizers, OSL, MSL, and other, various ones, World Cyber Games, etc., in the early 2000s, is identical to the 2 each patches that Riot releases for League of Legends. So that's the counter argument or the easy rebuttal that people don't want to accept.
Hmm.
League is a patchless game for the most part.
That makes sense. I mean, I guess yeah, I could think of it as like, well, the patch isn't drastic enough to change the game
Correct.
as a whole.
Correct.
It just changes. Oh, this champion's a little stronger now, or whatever. I
And
do like
once they,
yeah. This
sorry, go ahead.
season, well, this season is going to be the big patch, right? Like the whole map is changing.
This season will be a big patch in the same way that StarCraft 2 has big patches. And then it goes immediately back to being a patchless game.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So it only lasts a short amount of time, which is what's so fucking fascinating. Is that you have all of this patchless game and you don't engage with it because you perceive it as a patched game.
Right.
Um,
It's like you have to
and me and
drastically.
Max used to talk about this all the time.
Yeah, it's like when people think, oh, my champ got nerfed, I can no longer use it, and it's
Right,
like
right, right.
you lost
If
like
Ezreal,
5 AD.
right, so
Like
right, exactly. You lose 10 damage
yeah.
on an ability. Now, if that ability alters the speed at which you can push a lane, like by a dramatic amount, right? We're talking like Ravenous Hydra nerf early last season, or whatever, 2 seasons ago, right? If we're talking about that type of stuff, okay, sure. That does immediately impact your champion. You play 1,000 games, it has an impact in 1,000 games.
Mhm.
But if we do something like, okay, Kassadin gets, you know, 0.5 AP or like 0.0 something AP on an ability, the pro player has to play 500 Kassadin games. And even in those 500 games, he's overkilling the enemy target by higher than that math amount, which means that it played no effect.
Right.
And it might not have played an effect in the lead up to it and all this other type of stuff, which means that it's actually a patchless patch in that regard.
Do you feel like the meta then
getting
is
angry?
Well, no, do you feel like the meta then is?
Stay away from League. I'm actually getting so mad.
I'm sorry to bring you back into this.
Lord.
Like, do you feel
I've
like
been away for 2 months? I'm about to fucking
the meta then gets almost pushed subconsciously. Like, people are like, this champ can't be good now.
Yes, it is.
And so they just stop playing it. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that makes me want to blow out my vocal cords about this is it's all demonstrable. It's you can't argue whether it be mathematically or the demonstrations that have been supplied time and time again by other games and stuff. You can't argue with this stuff, and yet I've talked about it for 3 fucking years. And as large as I got as, you know, a co-streamer in my absolute peak and all this other type of stuff, I feel like I failed as a person because it didn't seem like I could get that message across. And no matter what amount of effort with demonstrations or just attempting to be objective, whatever. And it goes back to the tweet chain that you and I actually had where reading comprehension. Do you recall that one?
Yeah.
I think that is a really big part of it. And I can forgive people that are ESL. I can forgive people that are ESL in that regard, yes. But I think a really big part of that goes back to that. And so, yeah, metaphorically, it has completely broken me. And so even like while we're having this brief discussion about it right now, I am getting emotionally charged, and it's not a good emotion, which is like why I don't want to do this anymore.
I'm sorry, and I hate to hear that.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
I always, you know, actually, that's what I said to you. I really appreciate that you, especially, but certain people out there are willing to challenge the norm and just be like, hey, this is what I think about this, and this is why. And it's not right or wrong. It's not anyone stupid or anything. Like, it's just like, hey, here's something that I've thought about, and here are my grounded reasons as to why. You've established your premises, and you've drawn a conclusion. We should be able to discuss that, you know?
Yes.
And unfortunately, I can understand you've been doing this for a long time, and it's frustrating that it doesn't seem to have changed very much. But I think it's super important that people, not you specifically, if you don't want to, I'm not going to challenge your mental health by forcing you back in a league scene. But I think it's super important that people continue to do that. You know,
sure, absolutely.
You know,
and I don't think there's anyone that really does it anymore. And some people that do, I've noticed that they've shifted away from doing it. And I can only assume it's because they don't like the blowback.
Right.
And you know, so I'll say this: I think he does such a phenomenal job, and I think it's why he actually got so much attention when he first appeared on Twitter, like Molecule. At the same, you know, in the same vein, I think Molecule Lol does a really fantastic job at doing all of this stuff. And then at the same time, sometimes he actually just posts stuff that moves the needle in the other direction, and it's counterintuitive. And I have to wonder, why is that the case?
Well,
and I think a lot of people don't want to be non-agreeable, and they don't want to be disliked.
It's hard to get constant negative feedback, for sure.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's like, you know, and it could also be sometimes people are also just wrong, right? Like you can't be right 100% of the time. Sure. So it's really tough because I've dealt with a lot of that myself. Just obviously I'm low elo, but I have thoughts about the game, right? Like, hey, this is my experience. Yeah. It's not enjoyable at times. But I try to defend at least my opinion on it from an objective standpoint of like, this is why I don't like it, right? Like, these are the things that I see in game that don't make sense to me. And higher elo players might disagree, like, oh, this is what this is, or like whatever, try to explain it. But I'm like, it doesn't make it right. It just means that, okay, that is the system that's currently in place, right? Recently got into a whole bunch of crap about MMR and like LP and all this stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense that MMR is based on a season-long performance standard of wins, losses. If I got coaching for 3 months mid-season, would it not be expected that I statistically should climb faster after that? Like, I should be playing better than that, right? But then why am I being gated over 100 games by previous MMR when I can go on a fresh account and immediately get to plat overnight?
Yes.
It doesn't make sense, right? Like, why would you gatekeep an account because it's got old MMR?
I'm not sure of the answer.
Like I mean, it's a rhetorical question because it just doesn't make sense to me, right? And a lot of players just don't want to have that discussion. Like, oh, they just immediately throw out that, you know, if you just win more and you're better, you'll just climb. I'm like, that's not actually an answer though, because we're talking about a system, right? but I get it. Like a lot of people don't want to have those kinds of conversations because the blowback sucks. The dealing with the constant negativity sucks. League community as a whole doesn't know how to communicate. Uh,
Yeah,
like we
yeah,
talked about, like how can you jump straight from having a rational conversation with someone to all of a sudden just name calling, like pulling out
yeah.
random personal BS, like it's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get back to like the actual like pro scene. We'll kind of wrap it up here. Do you watch amateur at all, or do you only watch like challenger? Or
I do not. No.
no? Okay. I was just curious. Somebody asked if you would be willing to watch NA amateur at all, but I'm like, if you're trying to step away from league, that seems like the wrong direction. But I'm super excited to see how Fearless goes, especially with the best ofs, and maybe give LCS teams kind of a glimpse of like, hey, here's some alternative play styles that might work, or some things we can pull out. Because I
Yeah.
agree with you. Like we're never gonna beat LCS or LCK, LPL by playing their style pro, traditional macro meta comps. Like, how are you gonna play a meta comp against another meta comp when they're just statistically better than you at every position?
Right. Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
doesn't make sense. The games that we
Yes.
take, you look at minor regions who take games off of major regions. It's like they play all this crazy stuff. You got like, yeah, I don't know, like mage bots. You got all sorts of like off meta
Yeah.
junglers. Like that's the way to go. Like just throw them into a
Right.
fist fight, increase variability, see what happens. Like,
Yes.
but okay. And then what do you think sets, I guess, great teams apart from good teams right now? Like if it's player driven, you think coaching doesn't really matter all that much in terms of player development.
No, I don't think. I don't think it. I think coaching counts for. I think actually coaching in the mass majority of cases hurts more than it helps.
Hmm. Like because it puts them into a box or it restricts
Well,
ideas
because
or
we're ultimately using conjecture, right? In a way. And from what I know from being a fly on the wall in many, many, many teams and my relationships with lots of different players, House of Cards and politics it's an extremely plentiful thing. And it sounds like most coaches get dragged into being a political person, not like educator or anything like that. So using pure conjecture, if we're talking about 50, 100 teams in the world, there's no way for me to know. Unless you ask me about like specific things, and I'm only going to speak about things that I can substantiate, or that I know of things firsthand, or by someone who's experiencing it firsthand, or something like that. So in that regard, I think that there's nothing that's been displayed and that would allow us to answer in any way other than this.
Yeah. That's kind of unfortunate because we'd like to see a system that actually makes sense, right? Like the traditional sports model, like coaches should help players develop, maybe not teaching them the game, but teaching them how to grow, how to develop as players, how to improve their skills, how to identify weaknesses.
Sure.
That should be what coaching is, but it ends up being a nuts and bolts thing of like, oh, let's talk about this champ matchup, and really,
Well,
I don't
so
know.
the response that I can give to this is let's go back to one of the original conversations that we had, where the East is always, or the Western teams are always guessing, right? And they always just copy and mimic the East. They don't actually understand what's going on. Now, oh shit. Now I am unfamiliar with like some of the stuff. Like I know you're a personal trainer and other stuff, right? But like, do you know? And just tell me if you don't, or like if I'm just missing here, I'm totally fine to be wrong. Do you know like what actually goes on inside of the digestive tract or the muscles when they rip apart the repair and all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Do you know about all of that? Or
Generally, yeah.
okay,
I've taken physiology. But I don't know it at the level of like, let's say, a registered dietitian would.
okay.
Yeah.
So the very first time, so I got personal training from the same person that did like Owner and other people. He's Paul Cho. He's on FlyQuest now. And my first time ever doing stuff with him, he told me things that you would hear from everyone, like why you do certain exercises or eat certain things and yada, yada, yada. But he accompanied that with the fact that he has a literal doctorate, and I think he's a surgeon. And he was able to quite literally tell me what's going on with the muscles and what's going on with the digestive tract, and what's happening with certain foods. And he was able to tell me on a really fundamental level, which means that you can strip Paul of everything, put him in a cave somewhere, and he's still able to walk out of the cave, find things, and then apply the logic because it's happening at a molecular level.
Right.
The logic. Most people in coaching, Western scene, are former pro players. Okay, they're former pro players. Who were they getting coached by? Well, they were getting coached by former pro players. Okay, who are the former pro players getting coached by? They were getting people that were just hired because Riot mandated a rule that made coaches have to exist inside of teams as well as analysts. Okay, so it sounds like we don't have anyone who was ever operating at a molecular level explaining what the fuck is going on. Now, I do think that people like this do exist inside of the scene. I think that Vygar demonstrates, right? And this is why I've always been an advocate of people that demonstrate. And I almost want to scream that fucking word because it is nauseating to me that people very high up in management do not demand demonstration when we talk about certain things. So people who understand things at a molecular level can demonstrate. You can strip them of all of their material, all of their tools and everything, and they can reconstruct it. This is why I've always laughed at Riot patches and, metas and all this other type of stuff, because you can talk about it at a molecular level and explain it if you really know what's going on. If you're just copying off each other's cheat sheets and looking over your shoulder at what the other guy put on his test, the way that most staffs and most managements are doing, then of course you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Of course you look clueless and not like fucking Tony Stark in a cave in Iron Man.
Yeah. And
so,
I've watched the way Vagar breaks stuff down for players, and it's
exactly.
very, very different than what most of the teams I've seen.
And Max was the same exact way. Yeah. And I think Molecule does a really good job when he does do it at operating to that extent. And I think that this is a very, very alien thing in the scene. Mm-hmm. And that's what Max talked about and why he quit. Or like one of the reasons that he quit and walked away. Is because it is not it's not ideal to want to be that person. And so to answer the question, going back to it, no one was ever getting taught by someone on a molecular level. So if that's the case, then what good is it by just saying that the title inherently comes with the knowledge? Because we know that League of Legends knowledge is not linear.
No. Okay. Yeah. So
I hope that answers.
No, that raises a whole other area of conversation, but we probably don't have time for that.
Yes.
I would love to.
It's up to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time. You're gonna pass out soon, right? No.
No.
Yeah, I think development of coach, like, so the way I see like LCS organization right now, getting it to a point of which we are actually competing, right? Doing well against it. One, we have the advantage of the organizational structure is already apparently better than theirs. What we need though is to probably have a developmental coaching side of how do we teach coaches to coach? What's important actually in hiring a coach, right? And then division of roles. I think the head coach is a very different position than the strategic coach from positional coaching. But we've sort of merged all of that into one position. Be like, hey, this is the coach. They need to not only do draft and help players learn and teach them, they also have to manage the team organizational side. They need to be the middleman between the org and the players. Like, there's just a lot going on there, which you would never see in a professional sports organization of any other type.
Right.
So, but I also agree. Yeah, like coaches. I mean, there's been a lot more of a, let's say, a culling of the herd in the last year or so. I think a lot of coaches have kind of been exposed, if you will, like, and kind of pushed out, and then a lot of coaches who've kept jobs and even gotten promoted up and stuff, like, are demonstrating that knowledge more. I agree with Vagar. Like, every coach, if you want to be a professional league coach, you should be putting out regular content, putting out video, putting out analysis. Like,
well, the really cool thing is Croissant, right? There was that tweet after they won LCS that I retweeted. Was it you that tagged me?
Yeah, he was talking about you specifically.
It was you, right?
Yeah,
he was talking about me.
Magic, yeah.
Croissant, I found on Reddit, because when you demonstrate, and again, I want to fucking yell, he demonstrated, right? He made a video. It was a demonstration. When you demonstrate, either the demonstration is met with resistance, which then either goes back and forth. It's like a layering thing, right? You're baking a cake. And eventually someone will be closer, to the treasure chest than the other. And that's what it's all about. So Croissant, me and Croissant have been friends for many, many, many years. And Croissant dealt with a lot of House of Cards. Some fucking Kevin Spacey shit. Like, Not like what he was accused of, but what I mean, like,
like actual
he
murder.
went through like, Croissant went through hell.
Yes.
Behind the scenes, he was wrongfully fired or like removed multiple times because of political things that just happened within teams, and he bounced around from team to team. And I think there were some instances where he was like okay with leaving. So even though that was going on, it's sort of whatever. But then he came out on top, and I think that's really good because he's always been an advocate of public demonstration, and he's always been someone that chased the molecular level of things.
Yeah.
And that's what should be glorified, and it's not.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
No, I think it's really, really good to see content from people like that. Because not only, I think a lot of people, they don't do it because they're actually afraid of being wrong, right? They're afraid of the backlash of like, well, what if I put this video out and Vagar V2 takes it, dissects it, and objectively shows me why I'm wrong? That should be a good thing. That should be a good thing.
Yes, it should be a good thing. Yes, yes. I publicized all my content because I wanted people to tell me that I was wrong.
Yeah, and explain why, because now you learned.
Right. Exactly. It's about who's closer to the treasure chest. And then one of the things that I never, I guess, realized is that my way of speaking with people that are not like peers or something just is abrasive, right? And I guess like something that I've learned in the last like year and a half or something with the autism diagnosis and all the stuff that I read and all like the therapy and stuff is I can understand it, I guess, more. But it seemed like people didn't like that thing that we were just talking about, where, you know, it's okay to be wrong as long as you learn. That should be the end goal.
Well, I think especially specifically with that diagnosis, because Vagar, you know, he also is like openly autistic, and he says, you're very literal. So it's not that you're abrasive. You're objectively saying what is incorrect about their statement, and people take offense to that. Nothing I've read him say or like seen in you either in direct response to someone's coaching stuff has been a personal attack.
Yes. This is something that also drove me mad when people say that I'm toxic, and I always ask them, I implore them, please show me something. Because if you ask me about a toxic League of Legends reputation person, I do not need more than 5 minutes on Google. If you want to see an actual toxic person, I need 5 minutes or less. I will get you a clip. I will get you a YouTube thing. I will get you a fucking tweet chain, something. I will not personally target someone unless they personally targeted me first.
Right.
And that's just because, you know, I believe in mutually assured destruction. So, like, that, it's this really weird fucking narrative that existed around me, and it circled me that I would be abrasive or rude to people, and I never, that's why I always ask the fucking question, like, please show me where that's actually happening, because I won't personally target them.
Abrasiveness and not sugarcoating things are two very different things, you know.
That's another thing, yeah, but that one's harder for me to argue.
Yeah,
and I can understand.
I don't think you need to sugarcoat things, right? If someone is wrong and you're talking specifically in game, like this is wrong because of this, right? This is a bad macro play because of this. These are things that are clearly and demonstrably evident. Like these are not opinions, really, right? The opinion could be, is it worth it or not? But really, it's like, okay, you reset here. You're going to lose 6 minions because of this. That is objective. There's no denying that, you know? And then the debate could be like, okay, whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. But then they want to say, oh, why are you flaming me on my video? Or why are you like coming after me and trying to like discredit me, you know? And it inevitably turns into just name calling. And everyone's like, oh, you're a fraud. And like, okay. And I think this is, again, not Elo specific. So whenever I've commented on Vagar's videos, for example, like he'll post something, I try to approach it from not the point of questioning what he's saying. It's usually asking for explanation, right? Like, I don't understand this. And he's never like flamed me like, oh, you're stupid, right? He's never once said that. It's always like, oh, he'll explain in very, very nuanced detail, this is exactly why I said this. And you're like, oh, that makes total sense. But I think a lot of people will go into his video and be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what is this, plat? And then like, how are you supposed to respond to that? Like there's no actual discussion there at all. But yeah. Well, I genuinely hope, I know you mentioned this, and if you want to elaborate further, you said you're about to quit too. Are you talking about League and specifically, or just the engaging with?
I mean, I'm not really sure, right? It's like weird. A lot of people think that I have like retired, like all this other stuff. It's very undecisive for me right now. I don't know exactly what is going on this year, to an extent. Um, I am at the precipice for sure. I don't know. That's a conversation that I still have to have with others.
Yeah.
I've been very caught up like the last 2 weeks or stuff with like my visa.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm like trying to figure that out first before I
Oh,
figure out like the
jeez.
next step. And it's also like publicly known that I like declined all like the coaching offers and stuff,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it was very close with FlyQuest. It was a 2 month conversation.
Hmm.
And then that was declined at the very end of October.
Hmm.
I think like October 24th,
Wow.
25th or something was maybe the decline. Um,
That's interesting
yeah,
because
so
well, right after C9, you had said I'm never going to coach again, right?
yeah, I wasn't yeah, I really insisted that it would not like be a thing, but again, and that's why I think why the talks were 2 months.
Yeah.
I yeah,
Well, I guess
there was.
what specifically was it about coaching that made you not want to do it again?
We trying to talk about what happened.
No, just in general, like you don't have to
I
get
got
into
all the I got everything.
you don't have to
I
get
got
into
everything
the
on the
details if you
external
don't want
hard
to,
drive.
but
Like,
like what is it about being a head coach or a coach and a professional coach that made you not want to do it again?
well, I made a lot of sacrifices to do the C9 jump.
Hmm.
That C9 was supposed to get me a visa, and here I am talking to you that I'm dealing with immigration stuff
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
evidently that did not happen. Um, so these types of like I uprooted everything, right? I left
Sure.
T1, which T1 to me is still family, in a way, right? I'm very, very close with everyone at T1. So I left T1. That feels very, very bad. I had like made all these preparations and stuff to just leave Korea, and it's very difficult for me, like as my home, and with the visa stuff and everything like
Yeah.
that. So there's this type of stuff, and then there is the infrastructural stuff that I perceived as okay, if it's happening here, it's everywhere, and I already sort of knew where else it was happening. But all I'm gonna say is there's no coincidence that Max Waldo also quit a year after me.
Sure. Yeah. And that's
Um,
something I talked to him a little bit after
yes,
that, but he didn't
like
get into
everyone
details as to
will.
why. But yeah.
Yes, everyone will flame me for the C9 stuff, okay? But please look at Max leaving. So like that is the fucking golden treasure map clue. Max leaving should just say enough.
Yeah.
Without like all of us fucking putting on a stream and fucking podcasting like
So
um
so outside of
yeah.
the specific I guess experience that you had when you were C9's coach, is there anything about being a coach itself that sort of dissuades you, or is it more like I mean, what
No,
makes you
no,
want
no.
to do
I
it?
always
Yeah.
I love the players. I mean,
Yeah.
I love players in general. I love trying to help pro players, right?
Hmm.
Like Gryffin, the whole
Hmm.
thing. So Gryffin, if he's still in chat, he can attest to this. I had to like fix him being able to join T1 twice. Um, and so that happened, right? I opened my house to boot campers for the last decade. I'm always players first.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with players. I
No, no,
absolutely
no,
love
no, no.
helping players that actually want to get better. Um, in that department, it's viewers first in the actual, it's
But
viewers first
well, when it comes to pro, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, I,
when it comes to the longevity of our career, yeah, it's viewers first.
I really hope you don't leave the scene. I really hope that you find some way to make it a mentally sustainable endeavor for yourself and try not to
Yeah,
read too much into the negativity. Because I
right,
do
right,
think
right.
like what you bring to the community is super valuable. Like you're raising discussion points that need to be raised, and not a lot of people have either the audience or I think the capability that you have to like explain yourself.
Right.
But it sucks. You're sort of this
I've
pioneer
become
of
Luke Skywalker in
yeah, but unfortunately you
the
sort of
seventh episode.
yeah you kind of
Yeah,
have to
LSOK Luke Skywalker.
you kind of have to take on the burden of also eating the flack. Like it's
I mean, it's fine.
shitty.
People will condemn me and they'll hate me, but again, it always goes back to that dreaded D word that they hate, which is demonstrate.
Right.
Um, And it doesn't matter how long I am away from the game. I'm always going to be able to demonstrate.
Sure.
Because there's very few people in the scene that operated at a molecular level, and that's fine. And
Yeah.
I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. I'm okay with that.
I mean,
I'm okay with being a
it's
reject, and yeah.
as long as it doesn't, I guess put you in a state in which you feel like it's not worth it, or you know what, hey, maybe I'm screaming at nobody and nobody's actually listening. Because I do think like the more that we can actually have these conversations, eventually, hopefully, someone with the capabilities, the reach, or the organization just decides to make the
Come on,
jump
yeah.
and like changing things a little bit. So um, but no, I think you come from a really, really interesting background because I'm a huge StarCraft fan. I never
Yeah.
played very much. I used to only play like the campaign. I dabbled in multiplayer and StarCraft 1 a bit. I got shit on, so I was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm not
Right.
good enough. But I loved like StarCraft was the original esport for me. I used to watch all the pro
Yeah.
StarCraft. Like that's
Hell
what
yeah.
I
Who
was
was your
so.
favorite player?
I mean, I was. You know what's interesting? I didn't even know this, but when TLO followed me on, I was like, wait, the TL, like the TLO. Like I used to watch his
Yeah.
Zerg play way back, and like
Hell
he
yeah.
owns Shopify's. I'm actually a huge Shopify fan now. I'm like, I hope they do
Yeah.
so well because like I used to love watching him play. But like I was like, StarCraft to me will always be the pinnacle of it's like esports chess. I mean, some people consider
Yeah.
chess an esport. I don't. I consider chess its own thing, but it's the original esport for me where the better player is gonna win. Like it was so
Yeah.
evident who's better on a good day. Like
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. I
That
also
was the beauty of it.
yeah. I almost wish League would adopt the FF rule like that StarCraft has the GG. Like if the game state is lost, you can say GG and just go to the next. But
Yes. Yes. Yes.
because then you
Yes.
can
Oh,
always
are
have
you
a
trying to
best
pivot
up.
this into the surrender conversation?
A little bit, but
Okay.
but I do think that I do think that it's a different conversation from pro to solo queue. I think in solo queue, you're gonna get so many surrenders at 15 minutes that are not should not be surrendered. Like I'm having people like want to FF because they died level 1 in a jungle invade. I'm like, dude, the game is not even started. Like they have 600 gold. Like relax, like
Yeah.
or like what 700 if they have 2 kills. But like in StarCraft, it's like, okay, there's a game state at which you lose a major fight and you like, I don't have the time to rebuild my army in time for them to wipe me. It's basically a lost game at this point.
I,
So
I, I I thought about it a little bit, because obviously I heavily disagree with the sentiment that is shared by many on Twitter of surrender voting. I think that surrender vote, rather than being a timer-based thing, that it be locked behind a gold deficit. The way that bounties turn on only if you're at a certain deficit, or, surrender should turn on if you're at a certain deficit.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a way
Yeah.
to basically save time, and then you can incorporate mathematics
Right.
that allow you to basically say that the likelihood that you win this game is less than 10%.
Right.
And then it allows you to incorporate mathematics, because from that 10%, what people don't realize, and I think ASAP doesn't realize this on Twitter, is that when you enter into the reality that the 10% occurs, okay? It's like fucking, what is it? Avengers, right? The fucking Doctor Strange. There's a lot of realities. There's a lot of realities where they get where Captain Marvel fucking punches Thanos, and then in 700,000 of them they still lose, right? So the thing is that the amount of realities where the 10% occurs, there's still a flowchart that comes after the 10%, and you have to play out that flowchart, and that flowchart has a flowchart.
Right.
So you're not in the reality of the 10% just because there's a 10%.
Sure.
And then there's also like these like the thing that I was trying to reference with poker and like this other type of stuff, and trying to say like there's math and stuff, is the amount of time commitment, right? If you're making a time argument, even if you are a 50%er, or a 51% player, a 50% player, you can actually math out that time-wise it is superior to quit in like the 10% or less scenarios.
100%. I'd rather play
you're
7
willing to
more
play
games. Yeah.
If you're willing to play games.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to play games, then yes, you're supposed to stay in the 10% scenario.
I agree.
Yes.
If I have enough time for one game, I'm playing that thing out.
Correct.
Like, I'm
so his
playing it out.
argument falls apart the second that you answer the question, are you going to play more games? and it's just math. It's not
Yeah.
even it. You can't argue it.
Right.
So it's really bizarre to me.
Right. Yeah, and
And
that's why
I don't care about people's emotions, and I think this
I
is like one of the things that people get mad at me about.
no, and I totally agree with that because also I know playing out the next 30 minutes of that nonsense where they're just griefing, and sometimes you just know, you just look at them play and you're like, we're not winning this because my team doesn't know how to team fight and they're just griefing. They're not making this game any more playable. I'm more open to voting no if you start seeing something trend in the right direction. Oh, we got a good pick here. We
Right.
got an
Yeah.
objective.
Yes.
If you're doing nothing
Yes.
good, just go next. Like everything is falling
Yes.
apart faster and faster. Like you're better off
Yep.
saving the time, saving the mental, because the worst thing that happens is you get so tilted trying to argue with your team and trying to salvage this game, and then the next game you go into it and you're like already mentally
This is
boomed. Like
the other thing is the average League of Legends player now is in their mid-20s.
right.
Time is different for us. Now I'm a streamer myself, but I can understand and respect the average person.
Yeah.
So time is not a infinite resource the way that it is for a streamer or a YouTuber like myself and Azap and these other types of people.
Sure.
Okay. You forcing them to play out another 20 minutes and then go through a queue and stuff like that. They might not have that luxury just for your fucking 10%.
Right. And then they're more frustrated.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they get more frustrated, and there's all these other types of things. And there's a lot of arguments that can be had here, both from an emotional spectrum and a mathematical spectrum, and all this type of stuff. And so I think that's what frustrates me most.
Yeah.
Because I am of the surrender camp, and I think that the math is now. It's almost like an appeal to emotion, where the ashiba. Sorry. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I just cursed in Korean. Something. Okay, sorry. It's almost like an emotional response in a way where. I'm trying to think how to word this. Actually, I'm sorry. The 10%. Yes, you could have won some more games if you just tried harder in the 10%. Or something like that, right? But again, it goes back to, are you just going to play more games? Because if you do, and you're even a 50% player or 51% player, there's the time argument, and you would end up actually climbing more, or all this other type of stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you're right. It's a mathematical thing. If you're winning 55% of your games, if you can fit 2 more games in that day, you have more net wins than if you played that one out.
Yeah.
Like. Yeah.
Well, if you win 2 more games, I think it's even, right?
Yeah.
You're equal to having won that.
Right.
So this is where you have to expand upon it with that 10 to 90%.
Right.
And the 10 to 90% game time average and all this other type of stuff. I'm sure there's some equation someone can do. And maybe I am, pretty fucking sure there's not a universe where there's some cross, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it ends up being worth. But again, this goes back to the thing. I'm willing to be wrong on this.
But I mean, it just doesn't. The whole argument lacks a lot of context because you're talking about a game that might be 10% winnable and a game that might be 20% winnable, and then we're being really nitpicky about how do you determine that when nothing in the game tells you it's at that state, right? There's no graph or anything like.
Yeah, that's why I think the addition of surrender vote becomes active.
Yeah.
No more timer. No more 15 minutes.
I agree.
Because it is so hard to get a 4,000 gold deficit if you're chain inting. You can't, because you can't give gold over.
Right.
The surrender vote actually comes online earlier than 15 minutes.
Right.
And
it scales with time.
It's a lot more reasonable.
Right. Yeah. It scales with time. Because then if you're at 25 minutes and they're up 10k gold, okay, you're probably not winning. How are you gonna get 10k gold back? Yeah, I think that makes a lot more sense. Having a better, I guess. I mean, this goes across League in general. Though I've had arguments with people about this too. That there's no analytics in League that makes sense. I'm like, that makes absolutely no sense to me. How is a game ever not able to be broken down by statistical analysis when there's a clear metric for strength and power relative to each team? That doesn't make sense. People are like, oh, you can never develop a system in which you could analyze good performance from bad. And I think that's such a, I almost feel like I'm hitting a brick wall because obviously people are going to try to throw all these really specific scenarios in and overall nuance, but you can generally say which team is doing better numerically by a whole bunch of different metrics, right? And so how could you not
Yeah.
show which players are statistically playing better for their role and champion compared to other players of similar role, champion, and elo? It doesn't make sense.
Um, yeah, for elo, for solo queue and stuff like this, I think that this stuff can be more tangible. But for pro play, I think it's a lot
Yeah,
harder.
yeah, yeah, pro play is very different, right? I'm talking specifically because again, this goes back to my MMR argument of like, how can you not reward or punish good or bad behavior, like performance in a game, when they say it's impossible? They have to go off win loss because mathematically, it's easier just to say over 100 games, if you're better, you will slowly climb and it's fine.
Right.
But it's a bigger issue of like people honestly, for whatever reason, don't think that there's any sort of statistical analysis that makes sense in League.
Um, Not that there's none. Yeah, I know that. Like, have you ever had these talks with Max or no?
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Max got
No,
real
it's not.
cerebral about gold. Did he ever talk to you about this? His philosophy about
We
gold
talk.
and
We talk about everything.
like
Yeah.
he explained this
Yeah.
to me once, but golden game is actually a metaphor for like life and time.
Yes.
And,
Time. Time. Yes. Yes.
and I was like,
Yeah.
all right, Max, I like where this is going, but
Yeah. No,
yeah,
it's very good. Very good. Yeah.
yeah.
His time
Uh,
metaphor. Yeah. It's good.
yeah, it makes a lot. But to his credit, like I've never had a conversation like that with anyone else in the scene, so it makes a lot of sense. Like as to why he sometimes probably felt like, okay, why am I not able to communicate with these people?
Yeah.
Like,
And this used to be the and it sounds crazy, but again, it goes back to the D word. Max could certainly demonstrate.
yeah,
And people don't want the demonstration. Or if they do see the demonstration, there's no discernibility. So, for instance, right, I told you just a moment ago that Paul told me so many things on a, like a molecular level about what's happening with the human body, the muscles, the digestive tract, etc. Right, when he was doing my personal training, I can't say if Paul's lying. Like I can't. I do not have an ability to. Even if I go on YouTube and I watch 100 videos, I still lack the knowledge to actually call him a liar.
sure.
In a way, right? And that is a real thing. So now, what if there's two Pauls? What if there's another person with a doctorate who also is ripped and who has also done personal training for other people, and this person starts saying this?
All right. Well, if you ever
Now
if
you
you
have
have
two
if
people.
you ever have questions, feel free to shoot them my way. I'll let you know.
No. But you know where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
Imagine there's two people arguing or
Right.
attempting to
Right.
argue at a molecular level, because we don't have that in League. But imagine you have two people attempting to argue at a molecular level. The next step is demonstration.
Right. Right.
So we know this in the scientific world. So we know this with counteracting flat Earth. We know this with counteracting scientific methods and stuff. We know this with certain YouTube channels where acclaimed professors across the world challenge these absolutely nonsense things, and they demonstrate. So it goes back to the D
there's
word.
proof and there's
The
evidence.
LCS ecosystem,
Yeah.
LEC, everyone, they don't like the D word.
Right.
They don't like the D.
They like
Me too.
like belief. They like faith and they like belief.
Yeah. They like faith. Yes, it's very faith. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's crazy because it's almost like in a faith-based system, they put the East on a pedestal and they're like, oh, everything they're doing must be somehow magical and different and like it's unattainable. But what you're describing is actually they're just winging it sort of, but they have such good players it works. And they have a system in which is a little more chaotic, but it sort of sorts itself out, right? The better players are going to kind of group together and find other good players, and they're going to work together and play and beat everybody.
Yes.
That's also wild because to me, it's like that should be something easily exploitable, right? Like the thing
Right.
that makes no sense to me about League specifically is I've gotten into so many conversations and arguments with people, especially at the coaches and all that stuff, about why is League different than any other skill, any other performance-based skill that we have as human beings? Why is League unique? And none of them can answer that for me because I'm always like, what I'm explaining in terms of structuring practice a certain way, skill acquisition, sandboxing, repetitive scenarios,
Yes.
iteration.
Yes.
This is stuff that it transcends
Yes.
everything. This is how humans learn. But why is League different?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the League is too complex for that. Like bullshit. Like there's nothing.
No, it's not. Right. Yeah.
There's nothing.
And
like
so in StarCraft, So Forrest Within calls teams out for this all the time on Twitter, right?
Hmm.
He mentions how no teams do sandboxes. No teams do 3v3s with jungler. And obviously, like at C9 or Korea 9, we did blitz scrims. And it
Yeah.
was after blitz scrims that the terminology got more popularized. Some teams would say that they use them. I don't know. Silent scrims was another thing on C9
Hmm.
because when there's a silent scrim, that's akin to, someone who's popping, Tylenol all the time. You take them off the Tylenol, you find out where it hurts.
Yeah.
In some ways, right? You
Yeah.
get to know a new symptom because you remove the anti-inflammatory. So silent scrims are really good in a lot of ways for diagnosing. Another thing that's really good, and we never got around to it, Jack didn't order it, didn't order a lot of stuff, was heart rate monitors.
Hmm.
Heart rate monitors can tell if a player has anxiety.
Hmm.
And in addition to heart rate monitors, you can also monitor a player's breathing rate
Hmm.
to try to tell these other types of things, which now allow you to symptom treat. Well, you're not symptom treating necessarily. You're getting to the underlying cause. You're getting to a molecular level. These types of
Yeah.
things are really important.
I talked a lot with them about that actually because they were asking my opinion on how to better integrate that technology, and I was like, the problem is we don't have a lot of causation. We have a lot of correlation, maybe, right? They might have an increased heart rate, they might have increased breathing rate,
Yes,
which would indicate that they have a sympathetic response to this stuff. But
at least it
you
draws
have
you
to
there.
you
Yes,
have to pair it to the game, and then you have to see
yes,
does
yes.
that some players you might see that elevated heart rate and then they pop off, or you
Right.
might see all that stuff and then they make a horrible decision.
Correct.
And so you have to then individualize that information too and contextualize it. But it is super interesting because I mean, nobody is really tracking all that at a good level yet.
So
It's
one of
very
the really
preliminary.
fun things, and if Papa Smithy heard this or something, he would know exactly what I'm talking about. I brought up a metric for player evaluation that I use in scouting that apparently, now Papa Smithy is one of the most weathered people in the scene,
Sure.
and he's never heard me talk about it on stream. Um, and he said he never heard anyone talk about this, and this was something that me and Max sort of realized in 2020. And I'm very vocal about it. I'm not as vocal as like other things. I think actually it's one of the least mentioned things that I do. I watch people's mouse.
Hmm.
Because the person's mouse is insight into their subconscious.
Hmm.
So where they're hovering their mouse, and this is why I demand first-person views when I try to evaluate a player. It doesn't matter what they're actively attacking or where their last skill shot was, where their positioning was, etc. The mouse is their brain. Because League of Legends players play on a very reactionary level.
Yeah.
It's all muscle memory. A lot of stuff is muscle memory. So what does that mean if it's muscle memory? Well, okay, show me where the person's muscle's at. Show me where the person's brain is going to before it's even there. You can only see that through where their mouse is hovering.
Like they're
No
hovering.
fucking coach.
They're hovering
Yes, no
back
coaches
towards
do
base.
this.
So it's
No one.
like okay, like they want to attack. Their mouse is going to be kind of towards the wave, towards the enemy, and
Right, where are
vice
they
versa.
clicking, and what does
I
that
see.
click say? So if you go to my tweets from Worlds, I actually point out why I can criticize Noah in a team fight because his clicks allows me insight into his subconscious.
Hmm.
He's clicking away because he's afraid, but there was nothing to be afraid of, which means that he actually can't keep up with the speed of the fight.
Okay. Yeah,
And it was happening
yeah,
multiple times.
that's
This comes
interesting.
from the hover of the mouse.
Yeah, and you have to see that first person because if they don't click, you don't know that.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct. And no one and their mother talks about it, and no one has ever done that.
Hmm.
So like,
This brings back
every
the
single time I
Vagar
talk
meme.
to someone about it, they're like, I don't do that, or I've never thought to do that because almost no one demands first-person VODs.
I mean, Vagar got memed a lot on the bad clicks thing, but it's so true. Like
It's very true. It's
that
the person's brain.
one
Bad clicks.
one bad click ruins whatever you were doing. Sometimes it's so bad.
Yes,
Sometimes, like, yeah,
yes. The meme that like Busio goes wrong with it, like good clicks or something like that.
yeah.
Uh, Bad click is not just clicking bad. You can have bad clicks, like you could have misclicked in team fights, or like you could have lost focus in that one fight. When I'm saying that a person has bad clicks, it's over the course of many VODs of their first-person view.
Okay.
Because it's where their mouse is hovering.
Hmm.
And that's why I was so sad when ProView went away.
Yeah, I don't understand why they removed that. I mean, that's actually
Yeah.
something so valuable for both coaches and fans. Like just as like you can learn so much just watching a pro player from their view, how they play the lane and stuff like that. Like I don't understand why they would remove it, but yeah, I mean maybe it costs them money. I have no idea.
Right.
I know the inner workings of Riot. Um, Yeah, wait, it was profitable and they made money. I don't know the financials, so cool. Well, what are some things that you're excited for this coming year, league or not? I mean, we just
Mm,
started the year. I mean, it's a fresh start.
hopefully, I can fix my visa stuff and
Well,
get my
yes.
permanent residence. I don't know. I don't know. There's not much I really look forward to. There's sort
Hmm.
of like a calmness. Like when I made like the joke, like Luke Skywalker reference earlier on,
Mhm,
where like
mhm,
is secluded on that fucking island, doesn't talk to anyone. I mean, that really does look like the trajectory that I'm going towards.
hmm.
I have like my apartment here, like locked into contract for 3 more years, so um, I might just disappear. I'm not totally certain yet. There's like conversations I have to have with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I have to know what's going on with my Korean visa.
Yes. Yes.
I'm like still gonna be doing stuff, like like the patch rundowns and stuff on FlyQuest channel is still gonna be there. I'm still gonna be LS behind the scenes, but yeah, I don't know yet.
Okay.
Is I guess the best answer.
Yeah. Well, best of luck with the visa thing, and hopefully, you find a newfound passion for what it is you want to do this year, and kind of pursue it. I think you're gonna be great. Just keep up.
Thank you.
I hope you continue doing stuff with the league community because I enjoy it. And would love to chat with you again on some of this stuff. But yeah,
Sure.
thank you so much for doing this again. I really appreciate it. Hope you had a great New Year's.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for asking. I think it was very enjoyable. So,
good, cool.
so
All
it was
right,
good. All right,
all right.
man.
Take care. Have a
Okay.
good rest of
All
your
right.
day.
See
See
you
you,
later.
LS.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye bye. See you. Bye.